FreightWaves Now. Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, our very first one of the year. I'm Kaylee here with Anthony Smith, back from the holidays.
That's right, and we're going to get you started off the right way because we have quite the show for you this morning. The freight recession took out quite a few players in 2022. We're going to see what it means for 2023 with Rachel Premack in just a few moments, a little bit later on. We'll also have Eric Coolidge around the air cargo market, really summing up what happened in 2022 and what it's going to mean in 2023. We'll also have a few carrier updates, some weather hits, top stories, and right now we're going to go to our first carrier update of the morning.
Welcome into this first carrier update of 2023. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by Donny Gilbert. Donny, we left off at the end of the year, or our last carrier update of 2022, talking about kind of setting the over-under at $2.70 a mile. And I took the over, and I mean, spot rates have soared throughout it.
And we talked about this. One of two things is going to happen. Mm-hmm. Do people want to stay out during Christmas and pretty much not get paid very well? And this is no, they didn't. We saw a lot of capacity probably go home for Christmas and say we're not going to do it this year. And since what does that do?
It pushes rates higher.
It makes capacity tighter, and then it's going to push rates up. So right here at the Christmas time, we saw a pretty good soar here in spot rates, all the way up to $2.98 a mile. Now, as people start coming back out of the house and coming back to work, we see a quick drop back down to $2.81. So how long will this last? It's going to be very short, and we will watch it fall here probably over the next few days until we get back down in this range of technically really where I thought it would peak at. But like I say, what do people want to do? Well, if a lot went home and nobody worked, that allows those very few that actually did stay, allow themselves to jack those rates up.
Yeah, and some of that, I mean, obviously in this holiday period, it's kind of less contractor freight. I mean, because if you look at rejections, they picked up, but they didn't go. We didn't even approach double digits.
So contractor rates, that pretty much ended right around through here because anything really after starting about the first week of December, that's just restocking shelves. Most of the majority of the freight is already shipped. And we'll see that once we get to the second section where we look at the volumes and seasonality and volumes. But let's burn through this right quick here. Looking at diesel fuel here on the next chart. Diesel fuel has continued to drop. It's leveled out here just a little bit. Why? Because we've seen the rack prices start to pick back up. Not a fan of this, but look, at least fuel stations have still allowed their prices to go down during this period of rising. They could have flipped back here, just as we've seen back over here in November. It went back up just a little bit, and they ran their rates back up real fast. They didn't do that. Even though this is a high period of travel, it was Christmas time, they allowed their rates to continue to drop, and then they actually let them just kind of maybe level out a little bit. But of course, during this time period right through here, there probably were, starting around this 21st, 22nd, a lot less trucks on the road as well, because this is the time period where they're getting off the road and going home. So during this period, we could have also seen a decrease in capacity, which could have helped.
For sure.
If we go to the next slide and look at the spread, you and I have talked about the spread a lot. We want it to be in that $90 to $1.10 range. Well, during this time period, we've seen it drop, and we're still at $1.35. So fuel stations are still very healthy. There's still room for retail prices to go down. But overall, we're still relatively high compared to previous years.
And that's probably why we've seen them really stall out as opposed to start to really increase because of how wide the spread was. I mean, we were talking, $2.25 a gallon just 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, they don't feel as much pressure to start to raise the prices at the pump. They're just going to slow or stop the decline altogether.
And here we had, 25% of America on the road here last week. So this is a drop down to 135. I've seen fuel prices down to getting real close to that $4 a gallon mark, and we'll see what happens over the next few weeks. Tony.
Absolutely. Well, Donny, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll toss it over to Kaylee Nix.
Thanks, guys, for that. It's time for our first look at top stories making headlines this morning in 2023. Starting off with a big one with the news from freight brokerage C.H. Robinson, who has announced that their CEO and president, Bob Biesterfeld, has stepped down from his post effective immediately. The position will be temporarily filled by Scott Anderson, chair of the board of directors for C.H. Robinson. Biesterfeld has also stepped down from his role with the board of directors as well. The company says that it has started a search for a new permanent CEO and has retained Russell Reynolds, a leading national executive search firm, to help find the next candidate. Jody Kozlak will become the independent chair of the C.H. Robinson board while Anderson runs the company. C.H. Robinson has also made changes to the membership of its audit committee and governance committee so that they remain composed of independent directors. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has approved exemptions for several drivers who are deaf or hard of hearing, despite the concerns of a trucking commercial safety agency. There has been pushback from a national truck driver training group, and the applicants were granted a 2-year exemption from certain rules. But the Commercial Vehicle Training Association says the FMCSA ruling is not specific enough on why the exemption was allowed. According to CVTA, the FMCSA only looked at state accident and driver license data to make the decision, did not back up why that data was relevant specifically to the cases. And the last mile delivery of big and bulky items will continue to be a very big opportunity for 3PLs in 2025, at least according to a new report. The report published by Armstrong and Associates and the National Home Delivery Association found that the highly fragmented market is worth about $9 billion and grew at an 18.2% compound rate over the last 5 years. That market is also expected to see over 11% more annual growth through the next 2 years. The report said that many companies are working to diversify their last mile capabilities, including adding on big and bulky service to capture this demand and continue to accommodate the rapid growth in e-commerce sales. And for those stories and more, you can head on over to FreightWaves.com. Make sure that you guys are interacting with us here as well on your FreightWaves app. We've got lots more content coming up, some new shows, some new newsletters, so make sure that you are staying plugged in. We're going to go ahead and toss things back over to Anthony Smith. We've got our top story of the morning.
Thanks so much for that, Kaylee. We're going to have Rachel Premack a little bit later on talking about some of the trends coming up in 2023 right after this quick break. Stick with us.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, where we are hitting off today's top story with Rachel Premack, our editorial director, talking about some of the consequences of the 2022 freight recession that is still ongoing. Rachel, thank you for joining us this morning. Happy New Year, and welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's dig right into it. Obviously, last year was kind of a sink or swim, the beginning of the sink or swim, right, for some of these companies, and some of them started to sink. Who were some of those key players that we saw kind of fall off the map?
Yeah, so unlike the 2019 trucking bloodbath, we didn't really see any major, 1,000+ power unit or driver carrier go under. Celadon, I feel like, was kind of the icon of 2019 in terms of that wave of bankruptcies. But the two biggest companies we saw file for bankruptcy would include Matheson Postal Service and UFI Transportation. And both of those companies struggled for kind of different reasons. We saw a big wave of Postal Service bankruptcies just because of the sort of changes that the Postal Service saw. Whereas UFI Transportation was connected to a bankruptcy at United Furniture Industries. So the companies that we did see go bankrupt, the reasons for their struggles didn't kind of were all across the map.
And Rachel, kind of speaking towards that, do you see that in 2023 there will be any subsector within the supply chain that will be more susceptible to any kind of hardships as we get into this new year?
Yeah, so 2022 definitely saw the companies that were most likely to struggle were definitely small fleets, owner-operators, especially ones that were in the dry van sector, perhaps servicing more e-commerce type orders or durable good type orders. I could see in 2023 more struggles along flatbed carriers or carriers that service home building. Right now we're seeing a pretty big decline in terms of single-family housing starts. We do see an uptick in terms of multi-family housing starts and in public construction, but that decline in single-family housing, I think, could really affect a sector of the flatbed carrier space.
Along that thread, Rachel, how closely tied are we talking about industrial real estate production and industrial real estate starts when we're talking about that flatbed side of things? We know that there's been obviously a ton of investment put into getting warehouses built, and is 2023 the year where we start to actually see those come into fruition? Will that kind of support the flatbed side of things?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really one tailwind for the flatbed space is a increase in warehousing space. On the other hand, there are certainly e-commerce companies. Amazon's the first one that comes to mind that last year decided, okay, we have more than enough warehouses. We need to slow down. We even need to kind of end some of our contracts or pull out some of these agreements. So it's kind of I think we could see more warehouses come online that would definitely be a tailwind for the flatbed space, but certainly we've seen plenty of large companies this year decide, okay, we've got enough and we need to maybe even pull back or reduce the amount of space that we have.
I think that's a great point around some of those tailwinds, especially, when you look at housing starts, things like that, there's still a backlog of homes that have been authorized but not yet started and homes still under construction. So definitely going to be looking forward to seeing how this all shakes up. So Rachel, when we're looking at 2023, you mentioned small carriers really being the ones that were impacted. Do you see this kind of moving anywhere upwards to mid-size to maybe even some large players as we get a little bit further in the year?
Yeah, so we already saw at the end of last year certain large trucking companies, Knight-Swift, is the first one that comes to mind, saying, okay, the headwinds that smaller carriers saw earlier this year, we're also now seeing that, especially when it comes to diesel or decline in volume. So yeah, these are definitely all things that are impacting larger carriers. On the other hand, kind of an interesting statistic from 2022, the large firms have actually increased hiring activity through 2022. Looking at federal employment data, trucking payrolls increased throughout that year, in a time where maybe you'd expect more of a decrease. More in line than what we saw in 2019, but instead we did see an increase in hiring activity. One theory around this could just simply because we are seeing more trucking activity shift from the spot market back to the contract market. And also a lot of these large firms do have, a big cash reserve after the bull run of end of 2020 and through 2021. So a lot of these companies definitely do have a big padding, but they are seeing the issues that small carriers saw earlier in 2022 finally come down the pike.
So, Rachel, as we sit here and we start 2023, obviously we're awaiting Q4 earnings and full year earnings for a lot of these companies that just finished up the year. Is there anything that you're expecting to see from any of these major players? I know you mentioned Knight-Swift, maybe people who have revised their guidance down towards the end of the year. Are you expecting anything as they come out for Q4 and full year results?
Definitely the expectation that these are going to be pretty weak earnings, especially given the fact that that was supposed to be peak season for these companies. We're definitely thinking it's going to be pretty weak earnings, but I think a lot of investors are pretty much prepared and expecting. There's not going to be any surprises. It seems like.
And Rachel, of course, the backbone of the economy being really the U.S. consumer. We've seen the shift from goods to services, services to goods, goods back to services. Do you see any type of trend going into 2023 that the consumer is really going to be based around? I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty kind of building. The job market is still relatively strong in terms of overall openings, but hirings have slowed down. Do you think any of this is going to kind of start to slow down or ease some of the overall consumer trends going into the new year?
Yeah, it seems like the Fed in particular is really keen on continuing to increase interest rates and ensure that inflation is continuing to slow down to that 2, 3, 4% range instead of that, high single digit range that we saw at the end of last year. Still transitioning between 2020. 23. It always takes me like 3 weeks before I'm like, oh yeah, this year, not last year. Anyways, so yeah, we're definitely going to be seeing the Fed continuing to increase rates, trying to halt inflation, and presumably at some point consumers will respond to that and really pull back some of their spending. We've definitely saw durable goods spending decrease by the end of 2022. But we are still seeing a lot of strength and resiliency among the American consumer, especially when it comes to service spending.
It's going to be interesting to watch for sure. Rachel, thank you for joining us this morning to get our first top story of the year kicked off. We'll hear from you a bunch more, I'm sure, as we move throughout the year.
Thanks so much.
Right now, we're going to head over to our first social roundabout of 2023.
How exciting, the first social roundabout of the year. Take that, Isaiah. Anyways, let's take a look at what's trending on social media. This morning, if you hadn't heard, NFL released this statement about Damar Hamlin collapsing on the field last night during last night's game. Unfortunately, had to postpone that game last night. Very scary moments out there on the field. I don't really want to show the video here. If you want to, it's out there. You can look it up. I wouldn't recommend watching it. It's pretty brutal. This is the Buffalo Bills had shared this on Twitter. A lot of football stars out there and teams tweeting out their support last night and this morning. And even ESPN posted this this morning talking about Damar Hamlin's charity, where he started a GoFundMe with an initial goal of $2,500 to go purchase toys for kids and children. And last night it got more than $1 million in donations. Pretty incredible. And like I said, very scary. Now, there is one video that's being shared a lot, and I want to show you. This is a video that everybody's kind of hoping you're watching more than you are the hit from last night's game. It's Damar before a game, going to see his family, big time family man first. And yeah, it's very scary moments. No real updates yet other than last night's announcement from NFL and the Buffalo Bills. But that's a look at what's trending on social media. We're going to take a look at our weather with Kaylee Nix.
All right, Christian, thank you for that update. Right now, we're going to talk about some severe weather marching across the southeast this morning, and we've got really kind of all modes going on in this really extended line. So let's move right into the radar and sonar critical events right now. We've got that radar up, and some pretty intense storms stretched all the way from the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana up through the western parts, that is, of Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, and even into the Ohio River Valley right now. We've got severe weather threats. So because of this, we do have a tornado watch in place as this line continues to move to the east, and this tornado watch is expected to be extended further eastward as that storm continues to march. Inside the storm itself, we do have several tornado warnings in place, as well as some flood warnings, some flood watches. Basically, all modes of severe weather are possible with this as it continues to move to the east, and everywhere from eastern Mississippi into western Alabama, and then central to eastern Tennessee needs to be prepared this afternoon into this evening for these storms to impact the area. So we do have heavy rainfall. We've got strong straight line winds. We've got tornadoes. We've got some embedded hail. We've got pretty much everything going on in this line of storms today. And if you are moving anywhere here north-south, across the deep south, or east-west and going through those lines, you just need to be super careful. Make sure that you've got multiple ways to get those weather warnings if you're traveling through or if you live in any of these areas today. For us here in Freight Alley, we've got just some leading rainfall ahead of that storm. The biggest impacts from that will be later on this afternoon into this evening, talking like 2 in the afternoon to about 6 o'clock in the evening tonight. Earlier timing if you're up into Ohio and West Virginia, and then later on tonight if you are in Mississippi into Alabama. So again, with this, all modes of severe weather possible. We've already seen some tornadoes with some damage out of this today, as well as some heavy rainfall. So just be super careful out there if you are on the roads or if you have any freight moving through the deep south today. Just stay weather aware and understand that it might be a little bit delayed if you're in these areas. We'll talk more about the weather, the wintry weather that's behind this line of storms coming up later on in the show. Right now, we're going to hand things back over to Anthony Smith.
Awesome, Kaylee. Thank you so much for that update. And right now, we're going to welcome on our next guest, and we have our very own Eric Coolidge. Eric, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Anthony. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well, Eric. And jumping into this segment, let's talk about the year in air cargo throughout 2022. What were some of the big things that you saw that really kind of happened that you think is going to be the overall trend to mark the year 2022? And what do you think is going to be the big things that are going to follow into the new year of 2023?
Well, there was a lot of, trends and patterns last year. It was another unusual year, still kind of working our way out of the pandemic. So not normal by any stretch of the imagination. I'd say some of the big key, impacts or influences on the market were the invasion of Ukraine, which, impacted the global economy and air cargo capacity. You had a big acquisition a couple of big acquisitions with a big investment group buying Atlas Air. That deal should finalize pretty soon. So that was like a $3.2 billion deal for a large air cargo carrier. And then you also had consolidation in the ground handling sector at the airports with a lot of these cargo handling companies combining. So there was a lot of activity there. And then, just in the market overall, it was a down year after expectations of maybe continuing the hot streak of the last couple of years. Volumes are probably ended the year down about 20% globally. and rates are down about 30 to 40%. So, but everything's relative. The market was still probably better than in 2019. Cargo revenues were about $201 billion. That's only 1.5% off of last year's amount for cargo airlines, and it's double what they pulled in 2019. So for cargo airlines overall, pretty good year. Although the IATA, the International Air Transport Association, is expecting about a $50 billion drop in revenue next year. I guess the other thing would be, a couple other things. The conversion market for converting passenger planes to freighters was still red hot. Leasing companies and express cargo operators are very interested in converting planes to get more capacity and replace older planes. So you had, a huge number of orders, maybe about 200 orders, and about 170 planes converted in the past year. That's well more than double what normally is converted in a year. So, we'll just have to see if that pace continues. Probably more planes would have been done, but supply chain disruptions, probably killed or slowed down that pace. So, they'll be playing catch up this year. And then I guess finally, it was interesting, I've been tracking all the passenger airlines pure passenger airlines that have started freighter divisions and, started flying freighter aircraft, which is kind of a different business model, increased again this year. So you had some airlines like, I'm blanking out right now. Gol, a Brazilian airline flying for, an e-commerce company in Brazil, WestJet, which is a Canadian carrier, and a bunch of others.
So, Eric, the other thing that we really saw in 2022 was investment in airport infrastructure, and whether that's in things that were actually starting to be developed or plans that were being laid. And that's something that I think is really, really important, too, because we are seeing so much expansion in the cargo side of things. Now I've got to have the airports on board as well. When we're talking about these investments in airport infrastructure, can we be expecting to see any of these projects maybe get ground broken this year or start to actually see progress on them?
Yeah, that's a great question. The airport infrastructure has been lagging for a long time. A lot of the big airports have continued to invest in their passenger infrastructure. So you see Delta Airlines or airlines and airports like JFK and other places, LAX doing in Los Angeles Airport have, massive terminal modernizations, and other infrastructure, including, people movers and trains and parking, but everything's geared for the passengers. So, as usual, cargo is kind of the second-class citizen, doesn't get that attention, but that's starting to change. You're seeing, JFK trying to invest a little bit more. LAX has talked last year about putting an RFP on the street to do a big cargo village overhaul. That's years away from breaking ground, but at least they're starting. Chicago's building up some more, close to finishing up a new cargo section. So, you're seeing some movement there. Philadelphia wants to really invest in air cargo facilities. But the real interesting one to keep watch on is Miami Airport. They've got what could be the first vertical cargo facility. They realize they're running out of space there, and so they're going up instead of out. It'll be pretty expensive, but they'll have a multi-deck or multi-story type of cargo facility with that combines all the forwarders and cargo handling companies, and everything will be consolidated in this one area. So it's designed to increase efficiency and take care of the limited space because they're landlocked or surrounded by a neighborhood. So and that's a huge cargo hub in the U.S. and for Latin America. So that's an interesting development. And then you're seeing some investment in smaller regional airports, secondary airports that have realized, we can take advantage of this neglect by the bigger airports and attract, cargo to our places as well as for e-commerce.
It's going to be interesting to watch for sure from the airport side of things. Eric, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit with the question, the recap of what happened for the holiday travel season. Obviously, we know it was an absolute nightmare for the airline passenger if you were traveling over Christmas. But did any of that bleed over into the cargo side? Did we see any residual delays or have to deal with any residual impacts from the winter storm? And then, of course, the meltdown of Southwest Airlines?
Yeah, I think most of the impact was, majority of that was Southwest Airlines. But, some of the weather was pretty bad in the Midwest and on the East Coast and other places. There were airport delays. So, any of those airlines, some airlines embargoed cargo for a day or two. So nothing major, but, there was ripple effects from international and domestic airlines that carry cargo in their bellies. They would have they saw some delays in shipments getting through just because of the weather, but nothing systemic the way Southwest had with their passengers. So any cargo or passengers, that ride on Southwest are primarily impacted. And, Southwest has just that interesting, they had some kind of unique problems due to their, older IT systems and the way their network is designed. So most of the other airlines didn't suffer the same way.
Eric, in the last few seconds here, what would be the theme that you would summarize 2022? And what would you say is the theme that you're looking for in the new year in 2023?
I don't know. I guess last year I'd say, turbulence or choppy again. This year, probably, return to normal, but we'll have to see. It all kind of depends on the economy and inflation. I think the big wild card is, the first quarter and maybe a little bit past that, volumes should still be going down and it'll be very weak, but, all this inventory that, suppressed volumes in the second half of last year, retailers could burn that off. And if, consumer is still spending and willing to spend, those retailers will now have to reorder. And so, we'll have to see if demand is curtailed by all the inflation and the economic slowdown, if there's a recession, or there's going to be a rebuilding of inventories, and if that's going to, increase demand for air cargo. So that's what I'll be watching.
All right, Eric. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you as always, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great being here. See you guys.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June. Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for a second check of the weather today. Moving into the cold sector of the storm, moving across the country right now. This one going to be much smaller and much less impactful than that winter storm that we saw over your Christmas holiday. But we've still got some snow falling across the upper parts of the northern plains as well as into the Midwest. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. On the backside of the storm, the cold side, we do have some pretty heavy snowfall across southern Minnesota into South Dakota, Iowa, and in through Nebraska. This is going to continue through today and into tonight, as this is going to be pretty slow-moving moisture and slow-moving precipitation. Do have some really heavy snowfall once again through that I-90 corridor. Some places in I-90 were shut down for over a week with the last winter storm, so they're still dealing with snow issues there, moving all the way from east to west, from Wisconsin through southern Minnesota in through South Dakota. And with that, we will continue to see some road closures as well as some delays there. So just be sure that you are anticipating those delays if you're moving anywhere on I-90 here the next few days. Same thing into Nebraska, I-80, it could be looking at some possible delays, but most of the snow is contained to the north of that. It will wrap around slowly, though, down to the southwest as we continue through the day today. Can be expecting total snowfall amounts between about 4 to 6 inches. Heavier isolated spots could see over a foot for some of this. Once again, blizzard conditions could become a thing as well for southwestern Minnesota. We do have winter storm warnings in place all the way from Minneapolis, St. Paul, down through the southwest corner of Minnesota into Sioux City, Iowa, and into Nebraska, South Dakota. So just be super careful out there. Those winter storm warnings should be allowed to expire as we continue to move through the evening hours tonight. Overall, we can also expect some reduced visibility in places, and it is going to be difficult driving out there on I-90 and I-80 for a little bit. So just be careful, take your time, slow down, avoid the area if at all possible. We'll talk a little bit more about weather coming up in our second hour of FreightWaves Now. Back over to Anthony Smith.
Thanks for that update, Kaylee. And right now we're going to welcome on our next guest. We have our very own 3PL expert, Mary O'Connell, is joining us this morning. Mary, thanks so much for being here this morning.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Happy to start the year with you guys.
Happy to start the year with you as well. And Merritt, we're talking about selling in a down market. Of course, in 2022, we saw things cool off, but what's going to be some of the big tips that you can really provide for really being able to sell and be successful in cooling times?
Yeah, I mean, so it's not really a surprise that everyone's going to focus on relationships this year and, you know, making sure that they're really satisfying their customer and really just making sure that all their promises are delivered on. And, you know, it's not necessarily the time where everything is so hot and you just have business beating down the door. You still need to be out there making those horrible cold calls, but they're a necessary evil. You know, doing your research, making sure that you can get to that second phone call, because if you just show up on that first phone call and go like, hey, we want to move your freight, and like that's all you have, or like tell me about the freight that you have. No, when you pick up that phone to call someone, you should already know their main thing that they ship. You should already have an idea of where some of their locations are, and then also what struggles come with shipping that specific item. So for example, if you know that if you want to really get into flowers or some kind of refrigerated stuff, you should know what that is, and you should know the challenges that come with it before you even pick up the phone. Or if you aren't 100% sure, you know, you can call and say like, you know, I'd really like to understand what difficulties you're having with your current logistics service provider. Can you tell me more about that? So that way you understand where they're coming from, and you're not just coming in saying, oh, I can save you 10% off the bat, and, you know, we'll do it better. We promise. Everybody does that. You really want to take the time to, you know, make sure that you're actually listening to what that customer wants, and you're not just coming in like, yeah, we can fix it. No problem.
In a world full of 3PL providers, you've got to stand out a little differently, right? You got to make sure that you are unique. Mary, obviously, we're coming into the start of the new year, and for a lot of folks, maybe their quarterly bids or their yearly bids have been decided. They've already figured out where they're putting their freight, and it's hard to break into that little space, right? You've got to find the cracks in the armor almost. When you're dealing with a company who maybe runs a lot of contract stuff and has those contracts already set and sealed for the year, what is your advice on maybe trying to get some of their freight that typically goes spot or tries to get through those cracks of those contracts?
So actually a lot of So a couple years ago, shippers were like, okay, well, we'll try you as an RFP and then you can get spot market. Now it's kind of like you have to prove yourself on the spot market before you even get a chance to bid on some of that freight. That's been a very common thing with a lot of shippers. So if you know that your shipper closes their bid in December and, maybe mid-January, they've already awarded everything, but you can't submit anything, that's fine. Just try to work and get on that spot market and just, it's never just be around. And, it's never, you always say like, oh, you don't want to be second place, but sometimes you do want to be second place. So that way you are just that guy around. So when someone's having a bad day or their current logistics service provider is not doing it, you can say, all right, well, what about this guy? They're just here. They have great compliance. Their metrics are great on the spot market. Let's give them a whirl and see if they can handle a couple, like a smaller contract. And so it never hurts. You might not get it the first time, but just be around. And I think that'll work out kind of well for you because everyone has a bad day. You just don't want to be the one that has that bad day where it's like, well, I'm just going to go look for someone else. You just want to be around and, be nice.
And Mary, speaking of those bad days, I mean, my heart really goes out and I really have a lot of admiration for those that are selling and prospecting because it's just a skill set I have not yet acquired. And really being able to stay motivated and especially motivated team after a rough week is going to be key. What's the best way to kind of keep that motivation up and really being able to come back after a rough week like that?
Nobody really likes going to work every day and hearing no about 100 times. Like nobody likes that. That makes for a really bad day. But that one yes or those 1 to 2 yeses that you might get kind of make it worth it. But the biggest thing is just know the reason why you're doing this. Like you're probably not doing it. You're probably not cold calling all these businesses in a day to make $1 million overnight. You're probably doing it so that way you can get your check, maybe enjoy the life that you like outside of work, whether that's your family or some of the hobbies that you have. So it's just remembering like, yeah, well, when I have 100 bad calls, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go home. I'm going to maybe hang out with my dog, go on a hike, hang out with my family. Know the reason why you get up and go to work that day. I guess it's kind of like the same for anyone that's having a bad day in any field, but just kind of know your why and know that, it's going to get better. Bad days are bad days. And if you have a lot of bad days in a row or bad months, then, maybe do some soul searching and see if this is actually something that you want to pursue longer.
So, Mary, let's say you are a broker, you've walked into 2023, you've got a good book of business, you've got a lot of fish on your hooks, right? All your lines are set and you've got fish on them and they're just hanging out there in your pond. How do you keep the clients, the fish on your hooks and continue to keep them happy where they are?
This is simple to me. It's just ask them, like communicate with them, talk to them, ask them like, hey, those 3 loads we hauled for you last week, we good? Like, is there any room for improvement? Like just, and if something's going wrong. So if that something's supposed to deliver by 4 o'clock and it's 3:30 and the driver's like, hey, I'm stuck in traffic. I'm going to be an hour and a half late. No big deal. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call your customer, call your shipper, call anyone for the bad news too. Like it's just like any good relationship, you're in it for the good and the bad, whether it's a good time of hanging out, having fun, moving freight, making money, or a bad time of something got messed up. Don't try to hide it from them. That's only going to break their trust, because if you hide it and get caught, then they're going to wonder how many times did you hide it and not get caught. And that just kind of ruins that trust that they have. So I would definitely say, just, focus on being there, like the goods and the bads. Communication is going to be key. If you're over communicating, which I have not found a time that happens, but if you're over communicating, your shipper will tell you. They'll be like, hey, we don't need this update daily, maybe just hit us weekly with the shipments that are going to be late, or only tell us when it's late. So you can always start with too much communication and then you can just dial it back from there.
And Mary, I think that's a huge part there. One of the things you mentioned, of course, relationships and communication. Of course, relationships is a huge aspect in any year in the 3PL segment, but do you see 2023 really being the year of relationships with this segment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in 2021 and in the second half of 2020, it was just kind of, it was so busy. There was so much freight to move that it didn't really matter, because if I messed up and I would just go to another 3PL, it didn't matter. But now that, the volumes aren't really where they weren't like they were then, it's going to rely more on the value add that 3PL can give that shipper and that customer, as well as, what can they do, like what value add and what extra services can they provide. It's no longer just about I'm moving freight for you. It's going to be about what can you add to my services, whether that's some kind of sustainability initiative or some kind of tech package. What can you add to it? So it's definitely going to be about relationships and leaning more into that consultancy phase, or that consultancy type relationship that a 3PL can have with a shipper.
All right, Mary. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Do we have the first chat call of the year this afternoon?
We will. We were going to have our very first chat call of the year. We're actually going to talk about selling in this type of market and how to, not lose your mind making cold calls.
Awesome, Mary. I'm looking forward to that episode and looking forward to hearing more from you throughout the year. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Anytime, guys. Have a great big rest of your year.
There you go. And you can catch Mary this afternoon right here on FreightWaves TV. We're going to toss it on over to the wall. We've got our next carrier update with Tony and Donny.
Welcome into this carrier update, Donny. It is Tuesday, which means we're going to look at the drive-in market. We've got volumes here over the past few years, that seasonality look. Really, we are tracking awfully close to 2019.
Yeah, so when I first brought this up, Tony, of course, we're looking at the dark blue line right here. When I first pulled this up, it looked terrible.
Yeah.
By itself, just because this aggressive drop right here through December. So I went back and I pulled up in our seasonality so people can see this is actually a pattern. It's not abnormal. Now, what we're looking at is the height of this line. That's a little bit different now.
Yep.
So orange line here, 2019. You're very correct on that. And of course, the top two lines, this lighter blue and the green, this is the boom year. So we expect to be below that, but above the 2019. And as you just said, what's scary is we're pretty much tracking right in with what happens with 2019. The trends are the same, yet we're just a little bit above. And 2019, not a great year, but freight volumes are overall, if we looked at OTV hour, we're right between that 9,000 and 10,000 mark. We want to be at 10,000 or above. So once we get there, it means we have shrank a lot in the previous years. And this is a tough year that we're following. I would expect this to continue right around and flirt with this line. We'll see it continue to drop down in December. We'll see a small bump that you've seen here in all 3 years. And then, of course, we're probably going to, plane out here for quite some time.
Yeah, you have MLK Day in January, right? And it's one of those federal holidays. You see a little bit of a decline. It's obviously not as substantial as what you see around Christmas and Thanksgiving, but it is there. And you see the dip in every year. So, we're going to see that little dip that we see. What's going to be interesting, though, if you look in 2019, that decline in December, even outside of Christmas, wasn't very substantial. This one was a lot more on a percentage base. It was more severe than what you saw in 2019. What happens in January? What happens in February and March?
Let's back up a little bit right here, and let's look at the split between this line and this gap as we go along, narrows, and then through here, December, it's very, very close. We hope that this blue line does not drop below this orange line. We at least want to be there and not flip it, because then we for sure know that we are in trouble.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's go to the next chart here and look at rejection rates. Rejection rates here, again, I may put the map here, Tony, so I could be over here on my side. Here are rejection rates currently. And I said they wouldn't get above, what, 7 or 8%?
They didn't even come close.
They didn't even come close. But there's two things fighting right now. Right here in the previous years, in 2019, which we got right here, we had overcapacity or whatnot. Here we have two things fighting this. One is high fuel prices, and the other is excessive capacity. So excessive capacity would have kept this down, but it still could have peaked up here because everybody's rising or pushing their rates up, even the big companies. But with fuel prices at the rates they are, these bigger companies, everything are fighting to keep those fuel surcharges. So here is a problem, and we'll see that continue on and probably keep these way below 2019.
Absolutely. Well, Donny, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check and get in with you again in the second hour. Right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. I'm Christian Thomas for the Social Roundabout. We're going to stick with football a little bit here, and we're going to talk about the greatest game from the bowl season so far, which was the Georgia-Ohio State game. Let's just take a look at Georgia fans watching the ball drop.
15-yarder to take the lead. 8 seconds left. Snap, hold, kick, ripping, and it is no good. It is no good. And you can hear the roar of the Bulldog fans here in Atlanta.
Yeah, and people said Georgia fans didn't watch the ball drop this year. Of course we did. We watch it fall to the left, though. Ohio fans not taking it well. Let's take a look at this video I found on TikTok over the weekend. I thought it was quite funny and unfortunate for, again, Ohio State fans. Just watch it.
Happy New Year!
Yeah, exactly, that poor kid. Anyways, I tried to get my video in there. I had a video of my neighbors around the house shooting off fireworks, enjoying the New Year's, and then you hear me in the background yelling for that kick. Anyways, that does it for the social roundabout. We're going to take a look at the last 24 hours in freight with our market recap.
So with the new year comes a new set of virtual events here at FreightWaves, and our first one is just about a week and a half away.
That's right. I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be our Sales and Marketing Summit, and that's going to be a way to get the year kicked off with marketing and being able to network, because we're also going to have a lot more events happening this year, both virtual and in person.
Absolutely. So the Sales and Marketing Summit will be the first one. It is a free event to attend. You can head on over to live.freightwaves.com and get registered for that. And while you're there, just take a note, maybe take your pen in your planner for the year, write down your schedule of virtual events for the rest of the year, because coming up in just about a month and a half, Global Supply Chain Week will be here on FreightWaves. That's going to be an entire week dedicated to everything going on across the global supply chain. Following that, we'll have Supply Chain Meets FinTech in March, and then our 3PL Summit in April before our first in-person event of the year.
That's
Cleveland,
right.
Ohio.
We're going to Ohio, and I'm excited about this one. I haven't been in Ohio in so long, and I think we're going to be well received there. I'm looking forward to this event.
Absolutely. So head on over live.freightwaves.com, get registered for all of those. You can do it during this break. We'll be right back in just a few minutes.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously,
which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Good day coming.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now here on this Tuesday morning, our first one of the year, getting ready to start off our second hour with a look at your 10 a.m. top stories. The FMCSA has confirmed a regulations exemption for 18 drivers who are deaf or hard of hearing, despite pushback from a national truck driver training group. The applicants were granted a 2-year exemption from certain rules, but the Commercial Vehicle Training Association says that the FMCSA ruling is not specific enough on why that exemption was allowed. According to CVTA, the FMCSA only looked at state accident and driver's license data to make the decision, but did not back up why that data was specifically relevant to the cases. And last mile delivery of big and bulky items will be a good opportunity for 3PLs to capitalize on, at least through 2025, according to a report published by Armstrong and Associates and the National Home Delivery Association. The highly fragmented market values around $9 billion and grew at an 18.2% compounded rate over the last 5 years. It's expected to see over 11% more annual growth through the next 2 years. The report said that many companies are working to diversify their last mile capabilities, including adding on big and bulky service to capture demand, continue to accommodate the rapid growth in e-commerce sales. Manufacturing leaders are expecting the United States to expand its manufacturing capabilities as more companies look to reshore or nearshore their operations. Xometry CEO Randy Altschuler said that nearly 2/3 of CEOs have plans to reshore operations in the near future, including using Mexico as an option. However, U.S. cross-border trade has some headwinds, from a driver shortage to increased border crossing inspections to a weakening value of the peso. This means more manufacturing could come back into the U.S. despite the higher costs usually found for labor. And UPS has announced that it will retain its residential delivery surcharges beyond the peak delivery season instead of dropping them in mid-January like usual. The Atlanta-based carrier has stopped using the word peak in its description of the surcharges and started calling them demand surcharges instead. The company may be working ahead to offset the anticipated hits to its labor costs from contract negotiations with the Teamsters Union. The current contract expires this summer, and that contract helped UPS skirt the labor cost inflation that other parcel carriers have had to deal with. The surcharges take effect January 15th and will remain in place until further notice. And flatbed operator Desiki has bought out its founder, Don Desiki, causing S&P Global Ratings to drop its outlook to the company to negative. The shift in outlook does not change its actual debt rating, but the outlook change within 4 months of a debt rating upgrade is unusual. Analyst Jeffrey Wilson said that the revised outlook is tied to the issuance of preferred shares to Don that will be provided in his buyout and how those shares shift the capital structure of the company. The new shares carry a dividend payment of almost 9%. You can find these stories and so much more up on FreightWaves.com, as well as our FreightWaves app. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. For the full FreightWaves TV experience, head on over to tv.freightwaves.com. We're going to toss it on over to the wall for our next carrier update with Tony Mulvey and Donny Gilbert.
Welcome into this carrier update. And Donny, we're always trying to get a look at kind of what shippers are facing and pressure they're under. Yeah. One way we do that, looking at tender lead times, and obviously the holidays cause a spike.
Yes, I'm going to shift gears here, no pun intended, and look at, instead of looking at it from a carrier perspective, let's look at it from a shipper perspective. And this is what our tender lead times do. So this is drive-in tender lead times, outbound tender lead times. And this is a great way to, as you just said, it's the way shippers are reacting to the current market conditions. Mm-hmm. And when shippers are under pressure or something's going on, maybe price increases or holidays are coming up, you'll see that they'll extend their tender lead times. And they could be fighting the higher prices, but typically when tender lead times start to go up, that could be due to spot market rates going up. Mm-hmm. So I threw this up here just to kind of show you. This is the van outbound tender lead time, and of course you see right here 2 big ones: Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's together. So it's going to be a little bit wider here. So when you see these that the shipper's under pressure, that allows you to push your rates up. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to do a proof on that. So the next chart here, we're going to go forward to the next chart, and I'm going to have the NTI on there as well. So we have this first bump here in July, and you see right through here, this is spot rates. This is the NTI, the average spot rate. You see it bump up a little bit. Mm-hmm. They're under pressure. Spot rates start to move up. The pressure builds. They pay more. It continues to come on down. You'll see a bump right here, but On the NTI, you don't see as a definite of a bump, but you see a downward trend that changes to a little bit of an upward trend, and then you see the pressure. And then, of course, down here, you see it a little bit more defined, and especially right here for the other. So don't count out tender lead times. This is actually something you can use. Throw it into a map, and you might be able to see it better here. Let's move forward here right quick to the next chart here. This is our change in drive and rejection rates, but I want to continue with what I was just talking about, so I want to go one more forward. But before we go forward, you saw where Seattle was in blue?
Yep.
Keep an eye on that. As we go forward to the next one, you'll see Seattle is white. Now, these are tender lead times that I've put on a 3D map, and I've actually here, I love looking at this map because I like looking at the volumes versus the dark spots, which means higher tender lead times. And even though Seattle had a huge increase in rejection rates, they do not have a very high tender lead time. That's because there's a lot of capacity in those markets. So coming up here on our lanes of the day, we're going to look at some certain markets like New Orleans here, which is a very, very dark blue. Detroit here, and I think I might have thrown in a lane out of Kansas City.
Yeah, that's one. It's a way to look into as a carrier, look into kind of a shipper's perspective of, hey, is there actually challenges? And guess what? You might see some in these markets that you highlighted that have these really long lead times that, hey, this is an opportunity. These are markets that may present opportunities.
Yeah, and so how would a carrier react to these? Well, these might be if you don't have, let's say you run a higher percentage of contract or spot rate because you work out of a certain region and you send your trucks out and you need to get them back. Well, some of those lanes you have contract rates to even get them back, but not all. Not everybody has 100%. So this might be areas where you can say, hey, I want to land my truck in Kansas City, or I want to land it maybe in New Orleans or Detroit, because I see those are hotter spot markets, and these will give me a little bit higher rates. Now, I understand we're in a time it's very difficult, so this little bit of higher rates could be a big difference if you're making money and losing money when it comes to the end of the quarter. So this might be another good map that you can use. Keep an eye on these tender lead times where you can see what markets are under pressure, or the shippers are under pressure in certain markets.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Donny, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. I know we've got our lanes of the day coming up. Right now, we'll toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you for that carrier update. We're going to go ahead and welcome in our next live guest of the morning. We've got Ellen Hoya joining us, who is, of course, the head of the Women in Trucking Association. Ellen, thank you so much for joining. We're going to talk a little bit about the association's big plans for 2023.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. 2023 is going to bring a lot of changes. And first of all, next week we have our annual strategic planning session where the entire board of directors and staff and stakeholders get together and determine what are we going to work on, what do we want to be known as, what are we going to be doing in the coming 1, 3, and 5 years. So that's next week, and that will set a lot of the planning in motion for the coming year.
That's definitely exciting. And Ellen, starting off with that, what are going to be some of the big things? I hear maybe new CEO?
That's right. So I announced my retirement a number of years ago, and so my target date is July of this year. And so the board the search committee has been interviewing a lot of people. We had a lot of people apply for my job, and they've narrowed it down, and they've got one person that they have offered the position to. She won't be starting until next week, so I can't announce her name, but she and I will be working hand in hand in the coming months until I can turn the reins over to her. So I'm excited about that. I hope to stay in the industry in some capacity, possibly doing speaking and writing and things like that, because I have a lot of knowledge up here from my 40-some years in the industry. So I don't plan on going too far, but I'm ready to turn over the reins of running the association to someone else.
I think that's super exciting to start a new year with a brand new CEO. And of course, you mentioned your target date is about the middle of this year, but I want to kind of pick your brain reflecting back on your time at Women in Trucking. Was there anything that the association has really accomplished during your time in its leadership that's really stuck out as your number one thing? Or was it just been kind of the culmination of everything that Women in Trucking has done?
The number one thing I would say, in 2007, when I started Women in Trucking, people didn't track how many women were on their boards or how many women were in leadership or how many women female drivers. They didn't even know what percentage of their driving fleet was women. And they thought that they had a level playing field. So they'd say, oh, we just hired the best person. And I'd say, okay, well, we don't have a level playing field because the trucks were designed for men. The uniforms were men's. Lots of places where women didn't even have access to a shower or a restroom. There really wasn't a level playing field. And we also had to start taking the physical component out of it, because not only do we have an aging workforce, but women have less upper body strength. And so let's take the physical component out of the job to make it more attractive to everyone. So the biggest change I've seen is that the industry has started realizing what women bring in the boardroom and as drivers: safer, more risk averse, different ways of making decisions. And now the industry is embracing that and saying, we get it, Ellen, you've made your point, so now help us bring more women in. And we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of female drivers, female safety directors, dispatchers, and women serving in CEO, the C-level, the C-suite, and on boards as well. So I believe that we've stressed the value that women bring to the industry and how we think differently and how that makes for a better bottom line.
Definitely have come a long way, and Ellen, have to, of course, thank you for all you've done for the industry and everything that you've accomplished over the years. As you transition over the next 6 months here, is there anything left on your checklist or to-do list over the last few months here as like a little cherry on top, or is it really just kind of making sure that the new CEO is getting trained up?
So a couple things that we've really struggled with is how to create chapters. People want to keep the conversation going during the year. So it's you know, are they a legal entity? Are they, you know, how do we protect our brand if we've got these groups, you know, having meetings? So we really struggled with how to set up chapters. So the incoming CEO has experience with that. So I'm very excited about getting that kind of guidance. And the other thing is we get contacted from, you know, companies around the world who want to tap into our knowledge base. And I'm trying to figure out how we can be more of an international resource. I mean, I've done webinars for people in Brazil, and I'm going to Australia later this year, and other other groups around the world say, look at the United States, and they say, well, how come you're doing so well? Come and share your knowledge with us. So I think maybe the chapters and the international growth will go hand in hand, and we can maybe create chapters overseas. So I'm really excited about that. That's one of the things that I've worked on, but I haven't finished that. So the new CEO will be able to help us with that.
I love that, and the fact that Women in Trucking is so influential that you've got a really truly global request for this knowledge. Are you guys thinking about maybe talking about, obviously your online resource is pretty deep when you're talking about tips and blog posts and articles, but maybe becoming this like go-to database for people who are looking to maybe improve their relations with women in the industry?
Yeah, not only that, but we need to be more culturally aware. So, like, you know, if somebody's hiring women in Somalia, I mean, we need to be sensitive to their culture and help them survive not only as a female driver or a female professional, but we have to better understand their culture. And we are so, I'll say nationally centric in the United States that we think everyone should adapt to us. Well, I don't believe that. I think we need to be sensitive to the struggles that they have because of their culture. So that's one of the goals, is to really expand beyond just the ways they can attract more women, but why and how and what are the special needs that they might have in that country.
And I can only imagine that those types of growths from a cultural aspect can only even make us even better here domestically as well. As we move throughout the year of 2023, one of the things that you mentioned, of course, conferences. What do we have on tap in the coming weeks or months here?
So our conference this year, we had 1,750 registered attendees, and that was up from 800 the year before. And we fit everyone in, but we made changes. We learned from some of the challenges, and so we actually do have room for 3,500 at the Hilton Anatole, moving some things around, changing some floor plans and things like that. So, I mean, since we doubled from last year, or from 2021 to 2022, we are ready to double from 2021 to 2022 to 2023. And we're also looking at having a major name for a keynote, like, you know, somebody who has name recognition, who's been a leader, an icon, somebody who can talk about challenges women face and how they've overcome them. So we are really looking for a huge name keynote this year, which is a big change.
I love that. And okay, we can't disparage Robin Hutchison as a keynote speaker, because like she is a huge name. She was awesome there at the Accelerate conference, and I loved getting to hear from her on that main stage. Was there any feedback that you guys got from Accelerate that you're going to take into next year, besides just kind of the logistical issues of it? I thought the content was incredible.
Yeah, the biggest thing we hear is that it was very educational, very informational, and also fun. I mean, we want to keep the fun in it. So we had a biker night this past conference. So next year we're going to do a casino night. And there's your little tip that I just shared with you. So it's going to be, we're changing things up because we want people to be able to relax and have fun, but we also want them to learn. And the number one reason people come is for networking. So we need to give them opportunities to be talking to each other, you know, having lunch with each other. A couple things that we did that we are going to change is instead of doing lunch and learn, we're just going to let people eat their lunches because we didn't see a lot of movement on people wanting to talk about things over their lunch. So we want to make it more of a networking opportunity. But you saw, Kaylee, it was a huge hotel, and you got your walking shoes on because the breakout rooms were in one area of the hotel and the conference was in another. And we even had trucks inside. We had 19 or 20 vehicles in the technology tour. So that's all going to grow, and we have room for it. So 3,500 is the new target.
Ellen, this is certainly exciting. And one of the things I love that you mentioned last time we had you on talking about the conference was that it's not just only for women attendees, that men should also take part as well in learning how to be, a good, ally, leader, or mentor, or really being able to help support women. And that's one of the things I really look forward to in the new year.
You know, we're really proud of the fact that 15% of our members are men, because even though we're called women in trucking, I always tell people we're not really for women as much as we're about women. And so many men come because they want to have a more diverse, gender diverse workforce. And I really applaud that. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. It's not just for women, it's for everyone.
Awesome. Well, Ellen, we're looking forward to hearing more from you in the upcoming year. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. And congratulations on the retirement coming shortly.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great week.
You as well. And right now, we're going to head over to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix with our first weather update of the second hour.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. Moving on to the west coast of California, where we've got another pretty significant storm system setting up. It's going to bring a lot of onshore wind, some heavy rainfall, as well as some possibility for mudslides and flooding along California the next few days. Let's move right into sonar critical events. Turn the radar off, but we do have those watchtower advisories on. And basically all along the California coast, from the northern part all the way down through San Francisco, Salinas, just to the north of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo, we've got high wind watches in place. So we can be expecting wind gusts of about 45 to 50 miles an hour, sustained winds of about 25 to 30. And then in the mountains, the Central California mountains from Sacramento up that I-5 corridor and then down through Fresno, can expect those wind gusts to be even higher, especially in the higher elevations. Because of that, we've got lots of onshore flow, so more heavy rainfall coming to California. Some places where they've already experienced really their yearly total rainfall in the last 2 weeks or so. So we'll put on that predicted rain, and we can see the really target of this is going to be just to the north of San Francisco up through Eureka. But again, some heavy rainfall expected around the San Jose, Salinas area as well. Total rainfall amount is going to range from about 2.5 to 4 inches in some places. Could be seeing isolated, locally higher amounts as well. Because of this, we do also see some road problems. We've got some flooding issues. Some places outside of San Francisco have been dealing with some sinkholes, and folks up in those mountain areas could be watching out for landslides and mudslides coming up in the next few days or so. As we continue to watch this atmospheric river really start to pour moisture into the California coast, up in the highest elevations in the mountains, so the Reno area and those eastern mountains of California could be expecting more heavy snowfall as well. So traffic and travel through those areas, especially like I-80 moving from eastern California through Reno, could be expected to have some issues. Mountain passes could be shut down as well here in the next few days. So just make sure that you're staying weather aware and keeping an eye on that as the snow continues to fall in those highest elevations, heavy rain in those lower spots. We're going to take one more look at weather before we're done here for the day. Right now, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back in just a few minutes. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome into this week's edition of the Research Corner. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by Joe Antashak. Joe, how's it going?
It's going well, Tony. How you doing?
You know,
happy 2023.
I know it's the new year. Happy to be back. Seems like we've been gone for quite a while, but obviously 2023 is here. So what better way to kick it off by kind of looking forward to what to look for, what to expect here in Q1. Obviously, we're going to have some surveys that are going to go out here over the next few weeks, kind of compiling those results of what participants are seeing. But really wanted to start by looking at what we've seen in the data, what that means for the first quarter, and we'll pull up one of my favorite charts within Sonar. It's our contract to spot rate spread. So Sonar ticker rates.usa, we see it at negative 85 cents right now. So that is contract rates excluding fuel, that exclude fuel, that rate per mile is 85 cents higher than the spot rate that excludes fuel as well. You look, it's as, if you want to call it wide as it's ever been, or narrow, however you want to look at it. I mean, the number itself indicates that spot rates are going to have to Spot rates likely are going to continue to fall, but contract rates have to be priced lower. And I think that's a trend we're going to see. I mean, Joe, you've seen a lot of survey results. I think we've seen people expect contract rates to come down. It's just a matter of, are we going to see it here in Q1?
Yeah, exactly. And just as a reminder to people, or maybe, if you're watching this, you didn't see the research, but in Q4, we published results from a survey that showed a plurality of respondents thinking that Q1 would see the bottom in spot rates, for this current market cycle. It wasn't overwhelming, like it wasn't a majority that thought that, but the majority did think it would happen in the first half of 2023, right? So going into Q1, really what we're looking at is like, one, have we seen the bottom for spot rates? The data will bear that out if that is where we're at. And then two, right, we're going to start to see some change in contract rates, most likely. Probably you'll see the spread, come closer to zero as contract rates decline a little bit. But that's not necessarily a given. I mean, it depends, it sort of depends on what happens with spot rates, right? Like if spot rates jump up in Q1, it's gonna sort of change the relationship.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't think it's necessarily, it's not going to be a surprise when we see that spread between the two narrow back to a more normal level. I mean, even if you look back in 2019, it was negative, but it wasn't, it was like 25 cents, not 85 cents. So I think we're going to see that narrow. I think the other impact we're going to see is what happens, everybody's talked about when we have a lot too, the consumer, right? The consumer side of the freight economy. You've seen kind of this starting to slow down. I mean, I think you look at Q1, especially after coming off holidays, you're going to see sales and things like that, deeply discounted items on the consumer front, which maybe helps drag spending along, but I don't think it's going to be as strong as maybe it's been in years past, especially when you start factoring in no stimulus packages, none of that, all of that's expired. So what better way to let's look at the other side, right? The industrial economy. And we've talked about it, it's held up okay, right? It's been the slower the slower side of the economy to react. But you look back in 2019, right? You kind of saw a slowdown in industrial production. The consumer was relatively strong in 2019, and that kind of helped freight volumes. Well, guess what? We've started to see industrial production slow down ever so slightly. We'll bring up a chart here of that over the past 5 years, and you see we've come out of COVID, and it took a little while. I mean, we're talking back in 2020, back half of 2021, where it really started to intensify. But it's going to be what happens here, and I think that's going to be what's interesting to the overall freight economy here in 2023. Is what does industrial production do? How does the industrial side of the economy react overall to the changing macroeconomic conditions?
Yeah, it's going to be extremely interesting to watch, and I just wanted to plug to these surveys that we're starting the research on today. We're going to start surveying for our Q1 outlooks. And basically, right, we have a different one for shippers, for brokers / 3PLs, and then one for carriers. And if you're out there listening and you, for whatever the reason, in the next hour or so don't get an email with a link to the survey, just feel free to reach out to Tony or I. Just send us an email, and we will we'll send you a link to the survey, and you can let us know what you think about what's going to happen, right, in the next 3 months to 12 months and beyond.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's getting in on those surveys is vital, especially. The more results we have, the better the actual information that comes out, right? I mean, the more respondents. I think you start looking at a lot of these indices that we see across freight, but also across the macroeconomic side. A lot of them are driven by surveys. I mean, you look at consumer sentiment, housing sentiment, the business conditions surveys sent out by the regional Federal Reserve banks. I mean, they are important. So definitely get involved in those surveys. We'll have that research coming out shortly, or in the coming months. And then we also have that freight sentiment index that we released, I guess it was in Q4 of 2022. But Joe, thank you so much for joining me on this week's edition of the Research Corner. We'll be sure to check in with you again next week. Right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back right after this.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our last weather update of the morning. We talked about the heavy rain on the West Coast, but we're also going to see some pretty heavy rainfall as a result of those strong thunderstorms with that cold front across the central part of the Southeast, the Deep South, and all the way up through the parts of the Ohio River Valley. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. Got that forecast rainfall totals up on the screen right now. And you can see really the axis of heaviest rainfall is going to be right along that middle edge of those thunderstorms. So strongest and heaviest rain going to be from central Arkansas up through western Tennessee and Kentucky, up into Indiana, Ohio, and then up into Pennsylvania and New York. Expected to see some heavy rain today as well. We could see isolated heavier spots just depending on where those heaviest downpours set up within that rainfall. So along with that, we did see that tornado watch get extended ahead of that line of severe weather. So right now we've got tornado watch that includes central and eastern Tennessee, just to the west of us here in Chattanooga, Huntsville included, down through Columbus, Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, and just to the west of Birmingham, including Tuscaloosa. So those tornado watches are in place. We do have tornado warnings in place as well in some of those spots. So we've got a tornado warning right now, right along that U.S. route, just to the northwest of Tupelo, Mississippi. And behind that, heaviest rainfall in place as well along those heavy line of storms. So expecting tornado activity all the way through the southern parts of the Deep South, Louisiana, New Orleans, along the Florida Gulf Coast, and then up into central Alabama, Montgomery, Columbus, and eventually Atlanta here tonight into the early hours of tomorrow morning. Main threats with this line of storms, though, going to be that heavy rainfall as well as some stronger straight line winds, but we can't rule out a tornado here or there, which is why those tornado watches are in place. So the heaviest stuff right now moving through central central Tennessee and then through the central parts of Mississippi. That line expected to be here in eastern Tennessee by about 2 to 3 p.m. today, clearing out by the evening hours tonight. Central and southern Georgia expected to see that later on tonight into the early parts of tomorrow morning. We're going to keep a watch on this as it continues to progress, but make sure you've just got multiple ways to get your weather warnings tonight and staying weather aware. We're going to toss things on over to Christian Thomas for our final check of what's trending on social media.
Thanks, Kaylee, for those weather updates. Now, last social roundabout, we talked about the best game so far in the bowl season, and that's the Georgia-Ohio State game. Let's review, take a look at this.
15-yarder to take the lead. 8 seconds left. Snap, hold, kick, ripping, and it is no good. It is no good. And you can hear the roar of the Bulldog fans here in Atlanta.
Now, people have been saying that Georgia fans didn't watch the ball drop, but we did. We just watched it drop slightly to the left. And now, last social roundabout, I showed you a video of some Ohio State fans. Obviously, they were disappointed right there at the end, celebrating New Year's, and then having to watch that. And I promised you I was going to show you a video that one of my friends took, which we were watching fireworks outside. They posted this on Facebook, so I think we should really see this because they're watching fireworks outside, and then you hear me in the background. Just take a watch. Needless to say, it was a fun night. Anyways, that does it for Social Roundabout today. Isaiah Buchanan will be back tomorrow. We're going to toss it over to the roundtable.
And welcome into the round table. Bill Priestley here with you, along with our Sonar team, Lou Falaska, Tony Mulvey. Tony, been busy today.
I have.
Very, very busy today. As you can tell, we're predicting 2023 and what can possibly happen. I know that we've entered the new year on a great positive note here, guys. First off, let's just kind of go through where we are right now. Just as the calendar turned to 2023, Luke, what's the situation?
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a really big collapse in the freight market, right? Mm-hmm. It's not Armageddon, we're not going to zero, but we have come off. Rates, especially spot rates, have come down on the truckload side. Demand on the truckload side has definitely plummeted, and this isn't just a truckload problem. We've seen the same thing on the ocean side as well as some other modes. Contract rates have held up better. They've had a slight reduction, although not nearly as extreme as some of the others. But as far as where we are today, demand has dwindled significantly, and rates have also dwindled, particularly spot rates, quite significantly as well, and that is cross multimodal.
Yeah, and then you look at the consumer, right? I mean, that's been the highlight, or the talking point, I guess. I wouldn't really necessarily call it a highlight, but you've seen that obviously slow down. I mean, you saw retail sales down in November, which is concerning, but not surprising when you think about what happened in October. But I mean, that if that trend continues into December, obviously you've got the holiday baked in there. What does that mean for going forward? I mean, it wouldn't be the best look turning into 2023.
Correction. All right. So I know that the two big questions on a lot of people's minds are how bad and how long. And eventually I want to get to those, but kind of paint us a picture of kind of what 2023 might look like coming down in the next 12 months or so.
I mean, we're looking here at the rates, right? So, I think that the biggest thing to call out here is that green line. If you look up the top, that's where spot rates are. So this is over a 1 year period that we're looking at right here. Okay, so that green line really started to accelerate downward pressure there in the beginning of Q1, and really didn't find a bottom until way down here, just a week or two before December. We've come up slightly since then, but not a lot. A lot of that's really just holiday bump, right? You know, we've seen different holidays have little bumps throughout, but for the most part, we've come down. Contract rates plateaued a few months later, but have slowly started stair-stepping down, right? So not a lot of significant movement. Traditionally, contract rates are about 4 to 5 months behind spot rates. So we might start to see this blue line, which are contract rates, really start to come down here in Q1 as a lot of those rebids happen.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back in 2022, in that Q1, right, contract rates were still on the rise. And so, I mean, you're going to come up to comps that we're already below where we were this time last year on the contract rate side. And we're moving lower. And you look where that spread between contract and spot rates, the only way to move anywhere is going to be lower on the contract rate side. It just takes some time to catch up. And we've talked about it since really June, when the spread was as wide as it was, almost $1. So that'll be what I think we see here really strong in Q1.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah. One of the biggest signals as we go to the next chart will be the tender rejections, right? So this little, this bump up, we've seen about a 15% increase in spot rates since the holiday season started, right? But what we really want to look at is these tender rejections. So the blue line here are those tender rejections, right? Really, the higher that blue line goes, the more it's going to push spot rates up because there's more demand that gets pushed to the spot market. So right now we've seen a little bit, and we've seen this, right? Basically, tender rejections, that blue line spiked in Q1 of 2021. Spot rates spiked about 6 months later. That's that green line. But if we look down here, I'm going to switch over here just a minute. You'll notice the green line has had a little bit of a spike here towards, for the holiday season, but tender rejections barely moved. A little bump. And I think, Tony, if tender rejections kind of are at this peak, what would we expect for those spot rates?
I mean, they're gonna come down from it's that holiday time frame, right? Capacity didn't really tighten up, at least if you think about rejections as a gauge of relative capacity of the market, right? There's no reason to get out of your contract rates when you factor in the elevated fuel prices. So you saw some more, this bump, likely more direct to spot, things like that, where you didn't have necessarily as much contracted freight to reject necessarily in those last, 2 weeks of 2022.
Sure.
That didn't even come close to where we were in 2019 around the holidays. And I think that's the concerning part is we didn't even come close to double-digit rejection rates.
Right.
And I think it's going to be a while before we get there. I think, again, this is another indication that contract rates are going to be on their way down, but spot rates are going to be headed down further, or they're going down further where they were before we saw this increase.
If we go to the next chart, I think it paints a really good picture for really where we go, because a lot of folks care about the rates, and rates are really important, but demand really tells us where that's gonna recover, right? It's kind of like, why is there a reason for rates to go up? Rates are going to go up because either capacity shrinks or demand goes up, meaning it exceeds capacity. So this is really a lot of colors on the screen here. Let's break this down. This is truckload demand in the U.S. We're looking since 2019 all the way to today. So you got a lot of history on the screen here. Basically, that bottom left corner there, that tiny blue line might be hard to see. Just kind of look where I've called that out in the little bubble. That's today. That's where we are today. So if you look here, right, that little green dotted line you see going across, that's where we are today. That's January 3rd. That blue line, or that, there's a light blue line below it and a little orange line right below it as well. That's 2019 and 2020. So we're basically right in line with where we were in 2020, before the pandemic hit. Slightly above 2019 levels. Now demand, if we look green and purple line up here, that's 2022 and that's 2021. So significantly higher. So we're basically back down at those pre-pandemic levels. So really, unless that line really starts to shoot up, maybe close the gap on this purple and green line throughout the year, there's not going to be much of a reason for rates to go up because that demand is staying diminished.
Yeah, it's going to be any upward movement, I think, in rates, especially here in the first half of the year, means going to have to be driven from the capacity side leaving the market as opposed to just this influx of demand. We look at it, I think we're going to track really, look at where 2019 and 2020 were in the first 2 years before, or first 2 months of the year before the pandemic really happen. You see the blue line shoot up there in March. Well, I would bet, guess what? I would venture to say 2023 is going to be a lot closer to those two than anywhere close to those purple and green lines. I mean, those, for all intents and purposes, won't matter in any way because they were the boom of all booms.
Historic time.
Yeah.
Historic time, right? Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the truckload market requires physical goods to move, right? You know, when we talk about inflation, the consumer can be spending the same amount of money today as it did, 2 years ago, but if those dollars buy less goods, there's less freight going onto the truck.
Yep.
And that's what's important. And I think the number one indicator I look at that's gonna move this line here is imports. So on the last chart we have here, we'll switch to imports. This is one statistic a lot of folks don't realize is about nearly 65% of truckload volume or freight is on a ship at some point, right? About 65%. So a massive influence is going to be imports in terms of where that demand goes. And right now, this is our bookings index, so it's a little bit ahead of where customs is. So a lot of this freight on that blue line hasn't come to the United States yet. This is what's being booked by, your retailers and furniture companies and, so on and so forth. So we're actually below a good chunk, about 5% below where we were January 3rd of 2020. So again, before the pandemic hit, before China really shut down. So, and again, we're really kind of back at 2019 levels. We really are. So, again, this line really has to move first. Unless that line moves first, you're not going to see an influx of demand.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at in 2019, right, on that far left-hand side, you see it start to pick up before it kind of slows down just a little. I mean, you have Lunar New Year that comes up in January, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think China, obviously one of the biggest most important things driving freight demand on the ocean here to the U.S., well, Lunar New Year's obviously very impactful in that. So you may see an uptick here in January, ever so slightly. I mean, I can't imagine it's going to be anything like we saw at any point in the last really 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. But after that, I mean, what is there to pull some of this, I mean, if you want to call it demand forward or pull demand into the U.S.? I mean, I was shopping this week, and you already started seeing things that you would think for spring and summer. I mean, you're talking grills. This inventory that got built up during 2022 and 2021, it's still there. Yeah. Like they haven't been able to burn off, these retailers haven't been able to burn off inventory. So, I mean. So
real quick, let me put a bow on this. How long and how bad do we think this is going to sustain itself before we see the bottom and start to possibly come out?
I think from a demand perspective, we have found the bottom, but I think rates are a little behind demand and contract rates will come down to meet that demand. And I think it's going to last at least 6 months before we find some recovery, but I think that recovery is going to be a lot longer. It's not going to be a quick return.
Yeah, I'm kind of with him in that 6 months before we see any. That first 6 months is going to be rather difficult.
That is rather difficult there as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much. That's going to do it for this edition of the Round Table, and we'll take a break. Come back after this.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our final check of headlines for the day. UPS has announced that it will retain its residential delivery surcharges beyond the peak delivery season instead of dropping them in mid-January like usual. The Atlanta-based carrier has stopped using the word peak in its description of surcharges, started calling them demand surcharges instead. The company may be working ahead to offset the anticipated hit to its labor costs from contract negotiations this year with the Teamsters Union. The current contract expires this summer, and that contract helped UPS skirt the labor cost inflation that other parcel carriers have had to deal with. The surcharges take effect January 15th and will remain in effect until further notice. Flatbed operator Desiki has bought out its founder Don Desiki, causing S&P Global Ratings to drop its outlook on the company to negative. The shift in outlook does not change the actual debt rating, but an outlook change within 4 months of a debt rating upgrade is unusual. Analyst Jeffrey Wilson said that the revised outlook is tied to the issuance of preferred shares to Don that will be provided in his buyout and how those shares shift the capital structure of the company. The new shares carry a dividend payment of almost 9%. And while container ships have gotten back on schedule for the most part, it's still about a 50-50 chance on whether your ship will arrive on time or not. Sea Intelligence released a global liner performance report that tracks reliability across 34 trade lanes covered by 60 container lines. Found that 56% of services arrived on time in November, the highest reliability percentage since August of 2020. However, the pre-COVID on-time average was 74%, well above the current number. MSC scored the best for on-time performance with 63.4% on-time success, and Yang Ming was the worst with 42.5%. You can find those stories and so much more up on FreightWaves.com and our FreightWaves app. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe, and don't forget to stay tuned for more FreightWaves TV coming up later today. You can head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to keep up with all of our live and on-demand content. We're going to hand it over for our final carrier update of the morning.
Welcome into this final carrier update of the morning. Donny, lanes of the day. Obviously, we touched on Detroit, New Orleans, Kansas City. We're going to start there out of Detroit.
Yeah, so we saw that. The reason I picked these is because their tender lead times were well above the average. So and when I say that, when I look at the tender lead time of a market, I compare it to, let's say we're looking at dry van. So I look at dry van. The average drive-in for the United States versus the average of that market, and see the difference. This one's well above the average. So when we pull it up, I just threw in Detroit to Kansas City. Simple lane, 764 miles, a little bit of a longer lane. I'm not expecting the race to be all that great. But we saw that tender lead times were elevated in Detroit, and you see it here in the market dashboard. Here, right near towards the end of the year, we see where the rates start trending back upward. And that could be a good sign. So that's what I was saying. Look at that map, look at the tender lead time map, and start picking those markets. This might not be a bad place. Obviously, if you're running loads out of Kansas City, I'm sorry, if you're running contracted freight out of Detroit, you might want to choose Kansas City as your destination because you can get your, or this is the opposite, I'm sorry. If you're operating out of Kansas City on contract, you might want to pick Detroit because you can return your truck at a rate of between maybe $2.85 a mile to $3.14 a mile. And that's not a bad for a backhaul lane for your company.
Yeah, and that was what I was going to say is seeing that confidence score at 2.5 or 2 out of 5, you get some volatility. You look at that high range at that $3.14. I mean, there's some wiggle room on the upside there to make some money above what the NTI is.
Yeah. We'll go to the next lane here, looking at Detroit run down to Atlanta, and the same thing. We see running back just after Christmas. We know that Detroit, the market is tightened up. Looks like maybe a lot of drivers have gone home, and there's very few out in the market. And we see this start to pick up here. So again, if you're operating in the Atlanta lane and you have all these choices, and Detroit's one of those, you might want to consider adding Detroit, accepting loads into Detroit, because you can return your truck 726 miles, which again is a pretty good run for these days. And it's at $2.91 a mile, nearly $3 a mile, and you could get $3 a mile.
Yep, absolutely. And that's what we're looking for in this time, right?
Yep, and these are hard to find lanes at $3 a mile, especially when our NTI is averaging $2.81. All right, next lane here. We'll burn through these next few here pretty quick. New Orleans to Dallas, we're looking at $2.64. But again, we saw New Orleans tighten up, and here we see it again in our market dashboard. And this is what these correlations I'm trying to put. How can you find some data that shows these markets that rates are increasing? And this is one of them. And returning back from Dallas back to New Orleans, just for the fun of it here on the next chart, we're still looking at $2.60, but this one has gone down, recovered just slightly, so probably not the best lane at $2.60 for that 500-mile trip. Tony, that's it we have for this week for lanes today, but pay attention to those tender lead times.
Absolutely. Well, Donny, thank you so much for the updates this morning. We'll be sure to check in with you again tomorrow. Right now, we'll hand it over to Anthony and Kaylee to close out our show.
All right, guys, thank you for that. We are all done here with your first FreightWaves Now of the year. We got lots more coming up for the rest of your day.
That's right. We have, coming up a little bit later on, Put That Coffee Down with Kevin Hill, someone I don't want to miss out with, because if they're talking, I'm going to be learning. I'm going to learn how to sell, how to close deals.
Absolutely. So make sure that you're staying tuned on here. And of course, we'll be back tomorrow morning starting live at 9. Have a great rest of your day.